In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to move objects around in the Unity environment and how to set up a scene. So we're starting with the scene from the last lecture where we looked at the different windows and how to move those around. This will be the default configuration that I will use for most of my lectures. Now, we've already added a sphere, but if you'd like to follow on and add other objects, in the hierarchy, you can right-click. Now, you want to right-click when you're not on any of these objects. If you select an object, I'll show you what happens. If you select an object and create a new object with, say, 3D object, let's say cube, it's going to attach the cube to the sphere. Now, if I just move the cube a little bit, like this, anywhere the sphere goes, the cube will also go because it's become a child of that. We will be using child objects in our animations a little later on. But for now, we're just going to create single objects. Now, if you accidentally make something a child of another object, you can just drag it out and away. When you initially start using 3D environments, they can be a little bit daunting. If you're used to 3D modeling, then the controls are the same as they are in Maya and 3ds Max, a little bit different to Blender. But if we hold down the Alt key in the scene view with the mouse drag on, you can actually rotate and move the scene around like this. If you want to pan the scene, then hold down the Q key and you'll get a little hand cursor and you can then move like this. So it's the Q key and the Alt key that I use the most to move objects around. Objects themselves, you move by selecting them. So if we select, say, we'll work with the cube, you can select the cube in the hierarchy, at which point its mesh will become visible. And that means that it is selected. You won't see that it's selected in the game view. So remember from our last lecture is that what you see in the game view is what the camera is looking at. Okay, so the cube, in this case, we're going to move it. So to move it, hit the W key. Again, these are the same controls that Maya uses to move things around. You'll get the axis system come up on the cube and you can move it using the arrow keys, which will move it along its axes. Now, if you want to know which axis you're moving the object along, you can look at this little gizmo up in the top corner, which gives you an idea of which axis is which. The blue axis is the Z axis. The Y axis is green, okay, and that's usually the up axis. So the world's up is always Y. And the X axis is in yellow. And so you can just move these objects along those axes, or you can grab the object in the middle and drag it around as well. Now, selecting an object and moving it in the scene might not be the best idea because if an object has a lot of children objects attached to it and you select it in this view here, you may not find that you've selected the parent. So if you want to move the parent object and all of its children, it's best to select it in the hierarchy and then move it from there. Okay, so that was the W key that will move it, or what we call translate. If you hit the E key, you'll go into rotation mode and you'll get this sphere appear with the different axes. So we can rotate it around the Y-axis by selecting that green one, which turns yellow when you select it. We can rotate it around the Z-axis and we can rotate it around the X-axis just by clicking and dragging. If you want to rotate it arbitrarily, then you can just grab it anywhere and move it. You kind of lose control of exactly what you're trying to achieve if you do it like that. So I prefer to actually be quite accurate and move it by its own axis system. Now, to resize the object, you hit the R key and you'll get another set of controls that you can use. So again, you can resize it in the Z axis, you can resize it in the Y axis, and you can resize it in the X axis. If you want to uniformly size it, you can select the white square in the middle and scale all the axes at the same time. Now, if this isn't accurate enough for you, you can also modify the position of an object in the inspector. So when the object is selected, in the inspector, you're going to find you have this transform component. Every game object has a transform component which gives you its position, rotation, and scale in the world. And you can see in the case of the cube, it's at x 1.089 for me, and then it has its y and z values. It will also give you the rotational angle that it is rotated around each of those axes, and also the scale that you've set around those axes. If you want to be particularly accurate, then you can just type straight into here. So let's say that we want that cube to actually be twice the size that it originally was. We would just type 2 in each of those of the scale, and it will go back into its cube shape and be twice the size of the original one. Just out of interest, a size of 1 in the Unity world equates to 1 meter. So when you're designing stuff in this world and you're trying to get the sizes right, just remember a unit cube is a meter by a meter by a meter. Now, if you wanted to rotate this cube back to its original position, then we would put 0 into each of these axes here. And then from there, you've got more control. If you say you wanted to rotate it 45 degrees around the up axis, you could just type 45 in there and that would rotate it nice and cleanly for you. The same with the positions. Let's say you wanted to put the cube back to the origin point at 0, 0, 0. We can just type 0, 0, 0 into each of those and it will put it back there for us. Okay, so that's how you create and move objects around in the world. One last thing I will show you though is if you've lost an object. So let's say this sphere, if I zoom out, I'm going to grab this sphere and move it all the way over there, that we've lost an object and you can't find it anywhere, then you can select it in the hierarchy, put the mouse over the scene view and hit the F key, and that will focus on that object so that you can then look at it. So you might want to keep it where it is. If you've totally lost it and you don't care where it goes to, then one trick I always do is to set it back to 0, 0, 0 for its transform position so that it's back at the origin point and I can move it. Sometimes you will create objects in the scene and they won't immediately appear by default at 0, 0, 0. So it's a good idea to then find them to put them at 0, 0, 0. Okay, so that's creating objects, moving them around, rotating and scaling them in the Unity environment. And we will use this a lot when we start to create little scenes that we will be animating in.